Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. Around 2015, I began to suspect that my wife, Jessica, was hiding something. Our two kids were about 4 and 6, young but old enough to tell you about their day. They started mentioning a lot about staying with Jessica's parents during the day. That wasn't weird by itself, but since her parents lived about 90 minutes away, going there 2 or 3 times a week seemed excessive. Basically, every day she wasn't working at her part-time job. When I confronted her about it, she denied everything, but Jessica was never good at lying. Her eyes would dart around and she'd fidget with her wedding ring. "The kids love seeing their grandparents," she insisted. "And my mom's been feeling down lately, so the visits help her too." I nodded, pretending to accept her explanation, but something felt off. I started tracking the mileage on her car, and sure enough, she was driving an extra 400 or so miles per week. I knew something wasn't right. Then one afternoon, I sat down at our shared laptop and noticed a sticky note with her Gmail password written on it next to the keyboard. I couldn't resist. I logged in to read her emails and discovered several exchanges between her and her college best friend Amber where they discussed how Jessica was regularly sleeping with one of her ex-boyfriends from high school. There weren't many details about him except for Jessica also trash-talking his wife, making fun of how she'd gotten fat after having kids. Her exact words were, "Megan looks like she ate the girl I remember from high school photos." I printed out these email exchanges and hid them in my work bag. I still needed more information, so I called my friend Derek, who worked as a police officer. He suggested I contact someone he knew who had left the force to become a private investigator. "Call Mike," Derek said. "He's discreet and thorough. If something's happening, he'll find it." Mike was excellent. I paid his retainer and gave him the emails along with what little I knew about Jessica's activities. He figured out exactly what she was doing. His report detailed with photos, times, dates, and locations how she would take the kids to her parents, then meet this guy for lunch at a cafe downtown, after which they'd go to a shabby motel off the highway for a few hours. Then she'd pick up the kids and return home as if nothing had happened. "What does this guy do?" I asked Mike when he delivered his report. "That's where it gets interesting," Mike replied. "He's not just some random ex. He's got a lot to lose." At this point, I hired a divorce lawyer. My parents had cheated on each other, and the fallout had absolutely destroyed my childhood and my siblings. It was something completely unacceptable to me. I also asked Mike to find out what he could about this guy. Mike absolutely delivered. I learned his name was Tyler, that he was married with 3 kids, and that he worked as a VP of sales for his father-in-law's tech consulting business. Interesting. So, this guy has a cushy job handed to him by his wife's father, and he's risking it all, I asked Mike. "People do stupid things when thinking with the wrong body parts," Mike said with a shrug. "Want me to dig deeper?" I nodded. "I need to know everything." At this point, I had my lawyer draw up the divorce papers. I also asked Mike for a couple more copies of his report and one more task I wanted him to handle for me. On the same day I had Jessica served with divorce papers at her workplace, I had Mike meet with Tyler's wife Megan and show her everything he'd found. She seemed like a decent person from what little I knew, and I figured she deserved to know what her husband was up to. What she did with that information was entirely her choice. Mike called me that evening. Just so you know, she took it pretty hard but thanked me for telling her, said she'd suspected something but didn't have proof. While the information about Jessica's infidelity didn't really matter in my divorce proceedings, we live in a no-fault state. Megan did a real number on Tyler. According to the publicly available court documents from their divorce and other related proceedings, she cleaned out their joint account, took the kids, and left. As soon as her father found out what Tyler had done, he was fired immediately. And since her parents actually owned the house where Tyler and Megan lived, he also got evicted with barely 48 hours' notice. Their divorce was ugly, lots of fighting in court and evidently outside of it too. I heard through mutual connections that Tyler went to the house to collect his belongings and started arguing with Megan. It escalated to the point where her brother stepped in, and Tyler ended up with a broken nose and a dislocated shoulder. "You destroyed my life," Tyler supposedly shouted at Megan. "No," she replied coldly. "You did that yourself when you couldn't keep it in your pants." There were restraining orders, several more incidents with police reports, criminal charges, and even jail time when Tyler violated the restraining order for the 3rd time. I can't find Tyler on social media or anywhere online these days. Last I heard, he'd left the state and moved back to his hometown. His ex-wife did okay. She went to work at her dad's company and eventually took over after he retired in 2021. As for me, Jessica and I got along well enough during and after the divorce. I didn't engage with her on anything that wasn't related to the kids, and now that they're both adults in college, I don't talk to her at all anymore. I don't hate her or anything, but I only care in the context that she is my kid's mom and is important to them. Nothing beyond that. Do you regret how things went down with Tyler? A friend asked me recently. I shook my head. Not at all. He made his choices, I made mine. He chose to cheat on his wife with mine, and I chose to make sure there were consequences. Simple as that. The next one is an entitled People story. The whole mess started when I decided to finally move into the place after years of it sitting empty. My grandfather had built this lodge back in the day when the area was pretty much just wilderness. It was a beautiful 2-story log building with a massive stone fireplace, rustic wooden beams, and enough bedrooms to sleep about 20 people. The property sat on 15 acres of pristine mountain land with direct access to some of the best skiing in the state. When he passed away a few years back, he left it to me in his will, along with all the headaches that apparently came with it. I'd been living in the city, working a corporate job I hated, and paying ridiculous rent for a tiny apartment. The ski lodge had been sitting there, fully paid off, just waiting for someone to love it again. So I made the decision to quit my job, sell most of my stuff, and move up to the mountains to start fresh. Maybe I'd work remotely, maybe I'd find something local. The point was to get out of the rat race and actually enjoy life for once. The problem started the day I pulled up with the moving truck. I hadn't even finished unloading my boxes when this woman in a BMW SUV came roaring up my driveway. She introduced herself as the president of the Mountain View Homeowners Association and immediately started giving me grief about not getting proper approval before moving in. I was confused because my grandfather had never mentioned anything about an HOA. Turns out, the neighborhood association had formed about 10 years ago when a bunch of wealthy folks started building million-dollar vacation homes in the area. They'd somehow managed to get most of the property owners to sign on, including my grandfather before he died, though I'm pretty sure he had no idea what he was agreeing to. The HOA president explained that all new residents needed to submit an application, pay fees, and get board approval before they could move into the community. She handed me a thick packet of forms and told me I needed to remove all my belongings immediately and resubmit everything through proper channels. I tried to explain that I owned the property outright and had every legal right to be there, but she wasn't having any of it. She kept going on about community standards and property values and how they couldn't just let anyone move in without proper vetting. The whole conversation was surreal. Things escalated quickly from there. Over the next few days, I kept getting visits from different HOA board members, all telling me the same thing. I needed to move out until my application was processed, which could take several months. They even threatened to fine me for every day I remained on the property without approval. I decided to ignore them and continue settling in. The lodge was legally mine, and I figured they were just trying to flex their authority over the new guy. That turned out to be a mistake. About a week later, I was sitting on my porch enjoying my morning coffee when a sheriff's deputy pulled into my driveway. He seemed embarrassed about the whole thing, but he handed me an official notice stating that I was illegally occupying the property and needed to vacate immediately. The HOA had somehow convinced the county that I was in violation of local residential codes. The deputy explained that according to the complaint, the ski lodge wasn't properly zoned or approved for permanent residential use. He gave me 24 hours to gather my essential belongings and find somewhere else to stay while the matter was sorted out through the courts. I was furious but didn't want to get arrested, so I packed a bag and drove down to a hotel in town. That night, I sat in my crummy hotel room researching everything I could find about the property, the HOA, and local zoning laws. That's when I discovered something very interesting. The ski lodge was indeed not zoned for permanent residential use. My grandfather had originally built it and operated it as a commercial ski lodge back in the 70s and 80s. However, it was still legally zoned and licensed as a commercial hospitality business. The permits had never been revoked or changed, they'd just gone dormant when my grandfather stopped operating it as a business and started using it as his personal residence. More importantly, I found out that the HOA's own bylaws specifically stated that their authority only extended to residential properties within the community. Commercial businesses were explicitly exempt from most HOA rules and regulations, since they existed before the association was formed. That's when I came up with my plan for malicious compliance. Instead of fighting the HOA's claim that I couldn't live there as a resident, I decided to reactivate the property's commercial status and operate it exactly as it was originally intended, as a fully functional ski lodge open to the paying public. I spent the next 2 weeks researching everything I needed to get the business up and running. I contacted the county about reactivating the commercial licenses, hired a lawyer to make sure everything was properly filed, and started reaching out to contractors about getting the place ready for guests. The HOA had no idea what I was planning. As far as they knew, I was just some defeated guy who'd given up and moved to a hotel. I made sure to keep a low profile while I got everything sorted out. Getting the permits reactivated turned out to be surprisingly straightforward. The county was actually excited about having another business in the area that would bring in tourism revenue. Within 2 weeks, I had all the necessary licenses, permits, and inspections completed. The ski lodge was officially back in business. That's when I started phase 2 of my plan. I immediately began advertising the newly reopened Mountain View Ski Lodge on every travel website, social media platform, and tourism board I could find. I offered competitive rates for both day visits and overnight stays, with special packages for groups, families, and corporate retreats. I also made sure to highlight that we were a full-service lodge with amenities like a hot tub, game room, and large common areas perfect for parties and events. The response was incredible. Apparently, there was a huge demand for this type of accommodation in the area, and bookings started pouring in immediately. I hired a small staff to help with housekeeping and maintenance, and within a month, we were booked solid through the entire ski season. But the real beauty of my malicious compliance plan wasn't just that I was back on my property. It was all the things that came with operating a commercial ski lodge that the HOA hadn't considered when they kicked me out. As a commercial business, I was legally allowed to do all sorts of things that would have driven the HOA absolutely crazy if a regular resident had tried them. I could have delivery trucks coming and going at all hours. I could install commercial signage visible from the main road. I could host events and parties with dozens of guests. I could operate snowplows and maintenance equipment whenever necessary. And most importantly, I could generate as much noise and activity as was reasonable for a legitimate business operation. The first sign that the HOA was starting to realize their mistake came when the commercial signage went up. I'd installed a large, professionally lit sign at the entrance to my property advertising the Mountain View Ski Lodge, complete with vacancy indicators and activity schedules. It was perfectly legal for a commercial business, but it definitely wasn't the kind of understated elegance the HOA preferred for their exclusive community. Then came the increased traffic. Instead of just my personal vehicle coming and going, now there were guest cars, delivery trucks, service vehicles, and shuttle buses regularly traveling up and down the mountain roads. The lodge was popular, which meant busy. The HOA president showed up at my property about 6 weeks after I'd reopened, demanding to know what I thought I was doing. I politely explained that I was operating a legal commercial business on commercially zoned property, exactly as the original permits allowed. I showed her all my paperwork and permits, which were completely in order. She tried to argue that even if the business was legal, I still couldn't live on the property as a resident without HOA approval. I pointed out that I wasn't technically a resident anymore. I was a live-in business manager, which was completely different from a residential occupancy. Many hotels and lodges had live-in management, and it was covered under the commercial permits. The conversation got heated, but there wasn't much she could do. Everything I was doing was completely legal and properly permitted. She stormed off, threatening to find some way to shut me down. The HOA's next move was to try to get the county to revoke my commercial permits by claiming I was violating noise ordinances and traffic regulations. They filed formal complaints and demanded inspections. This backfired spectacularly. When the county inspectors came out, they found that I was operating well within all commercial guidelines. In fact, they were impressed with how well-maintained and professionally run the operation was. The inspector mentioned that the lodge was exactly the kind of business the county wanted to encourage for economic development. Meanwhile, the increased activity from the lodge was starting to cause problems for the HOA that they hadn't anticipated. The mountain roads weren't really designed for the level of traffic that a successful ski lodge generates. Guest vehicles were parked along the narrow mountain roads when the lodge was fully booked. Delivery trucks had trouble navigating the tight turns. The increased wear and tear on the private roads that the HOA maintained was noticeable. But the real kicker came during peak ski season when I started hosting special events. Since I was operating as a commercial venue, I could legally host corporate retreats, wedding parties, family reunions, and other group events. These often involved larger groups of people, catered meals, and activities that went later into the evening than regular overnight guests. The first big corporate retreat I hosted brought in about 40 people for a long weekend. They arrived in chartered buses, had catered meals delivered, and spent their evenings in the hot tub and around the fire pit. It was exactly the kind of commercial activity that was perfectly legal for my business, but absolutely infuriating for neighbors who thought they were buying into a quiet, exclusive residential community. The HOA tried everything they could think of to shut me down. They filed noise complaints, challenged my permits, threatened legal action, and even tried to get the county to reclassify the zoning. Nothing worked because I was operating completely within the law. The final straw came when I decided to add a wedding venue service to the lodge's offerings. Mountain weddings were extremely popular, and I had the perfect setup with beautiful views, rustic charm, and enough space for ceremonies and receptions. I started advertising destination wedding packages and booked several events for the following summer. The first wedding I hosted was a big affair with about 100 guests. There were cars parked everywhere, a catering truck, a DJ with a sound system, and a celebration that went until nearly midnight. Everything was properly permitted and within commercial noise guidelines, but it was definitely not what the HOA members had signed up for when they moved to their quiet mountain retreat. That's when the HOA board finally reached out to schedule a meeting with me. They wanted to discuss a mutually beneficial solution to the situation. The meeting was held at the lodge, which I thought was appropriate since it was technically a commercial establishment now. The entire HOA board showed up, along with their lawyer. They were clearly frustrated and desperate to find some way to get me to scale back the commercial operation. Their first offer was to approve my original residential application if I would shut down the commercial business and just live there quietly like a normal neighbor. I politely declined, explaining that the ski lodge was now a profitable business that was contributing to the local economy and providing employment for several people. Their second offer was a cash settlement if I would agree to limit my commercial activities to certain days and times. Again, I declined. I pointed out that I was operating within all legal parameters and had no obligation to restrict a legitimate business to accommodate their preferences. The meeting got tense when their lawyer started making veiled threats about finding ways to make my life difficult. That's when I played my final card. I explained that I'd been researching the HOA's own legal situation and had discovered something interesting about their authority over commercial properties. While they'd been focused on trying to shut down my business, they'd overlooked the fact that by allowing it to operate, they'd essentially acknowledged that my property was commercial rather than residential. This was a problem for them because commercial properties in the area were assessed and taxed differently than residential properties. More importantly, commercial properties weren't subject to many of the same local regulations that residential properties were. This meant that some of the rules and restrictions the HOA had been enforcing on other properties might not actually be legally valid if those properties could be considered commercial rather than purely residential. Several other property owners in the area actually had similar mixed-use potential, and if they decided to challenge the HOA's authority based on the precedent I'd established, it could create a legal nightmare for the association. The lawyer went pale when I mentioned this. Apparently, they hadn't considered the broader implications of their legal strategy. That's when they made their final offer. The HOA would officially recognize my right to operate the ski lodge as a commercial business without interference, and in exchange, I would agree to certain voluntary limitations on my most disruptive activities. Specifically, I would limit large events to certain times of year and provide advance notice to neighbors about major bookings. I agreed to the deal, but with my own conditions. The HOA had to formally acknowledge in writing that they had no authority over my commercial property, and they had to reimburse me for the legal fees and lost income from the period when they'd forced me to leave the property. They agreed, though they weren't happy about it. The whole situation ended up working out better than I could have hoped. The ski lodge became incredibly successful, generating more income than my old corporate job ever did. I was living in a beautiful mountain setting, running my own business, and doing work that I actually enjoyed. The HOA learned a valuable lesson about picking fights they couldn't win. Their attempt to flex their authority over me had backfired completely, costing them money and establishing a precedent that limited their power over other property owners in the area. But the best part was the irony of the whole situation. They'd kicked me out for not being approved to live there as a resident, and their actions had directly led to me operating a business that brought far more people onto the property than I ever would have as a simple homeowner. Instead of one quiet neighbor, they now had a steady stream of guests, events, and commercial activity right in the middle of their exclusive community. Every time I see the HOA president drive past the lodge and notice the latest group of wedding guests or corporate retreat attendees enjoying the hot tub, I can't help but smile. She got exactly what she asked for. I wasn't living there as an unapproved resident anymore. I was living there as a successful business owner, and there wasn't a thing she could do about it. Sometimes the best way to deal with unreasonable people is to give them exactly what they think they want, and let them deal with the consequences they never saw coming. The next one is a petty revenge story. My wife and I moved into a newly renovated building. The first 4 floors were there already as a sort of former slums. The building was renovated and had 3 floors added. We are in the new floors. There is a bit of tension between some of the new residents and some of the old one. Mostly, it's about communal resources. The old residents are lower income and have a mentality of not wanting to spend any money at all, even though they agreed to the renovation, gained extra rooms for their apartments, an elevator, etc. One of the contingency points is over the building's front yard. They don't want to pay for a gardener even though it works out to be about $10 a month for each household. To be clear, we don't own the apartment, we rent. But I get that some people have a hard time making ends meet and thought I would take the yard as a project. One of the neighbors, Danielle, keeps starting arguments in the building's group chat. She keeps writing crap about the old residents needing to respect the new residents more, about how much she spent on her apartment. She started complaining about the yard endlessly. She also orders food a lot, and due to a mix-up, I'm always getting her orders and sending it over. Well, I am a reserve soldier, and I was called in for over a long stretch. During this time, she kicked up a fuss that the yard looks bad. I apologized, explained I didn't have time to get to it on account of being drafted. She responded that her time is just as valuable as mine, and she doesn't want to waste it talking about the yard. Then just don't. This led to me noping out of the group chat. Didn't feel like fighting. Said farewell and thanks for the fish and left. I'm still doing the yard, but at my own pace. Today, 2 huge bags of cat food arrived at my door. Had her name on it. I put a letter on it that said, "Dear Danielle, sorry I didn't let you know about the delivery. I would have, but I value my time just as much as you value yours. Good luck. I am way too happy about this." The next one is a malicious compliance story. Company sends a shiny HR email. Subject line all caps, use it or lose it. We had to burn our remaining PTO by the 30th or it evaporates into the sun. Same day, my manager announces in stand-up that due to quarter end, no one can take time off until the 1st. I asked how to reconcile that. He shrugs and says, talk to HR. HR says, talk to your manager. Cute loop. So I open the handbook, because I am a petty librarian when annoyed. Page 14 has this little sentence I never noticed. PTO requests not explicitly denied in writing within 48 business hours are considered approved. There is also a note that partial day PTO is allowed in 1-hour blocks. Thank you, legal team. I submitted 10 separate requests, 2 hours every morning next week, 2 hours every afternoon the week after, a random Friday 3 to 5 to watch a plumber, and 1 full day to visit my mom. I sent the requests in our HR portal, which auto-emails the manager and CCs a shared mailbox nobody watches. Then I went back to my tasks and set reminders. 48 business hours pass, no denial. The portal changes each request to approved, green checkmark, confetti gif. Monday comes, and at 9:58, I put a cheerful note in the team chat. Heading out, see you at noon. Manager pings me to hop on a client call. I reply with a screenshot of the policy and the portal approval. Silence. Then 3 dots typing, then nothing. By Wednesday, our calendar looked like cheese. Half the team remembered they also had PTO sitting around and started filing it in little blocks. Meetings kept colliding with green bars. Finance realized that if we did not use the days now, they would be paid out at separation later, which they hate. HR wrote a new post saying we should coordinate, but that approvals already granted stand. My manager called a huddle to ask why productivity dipped. I said we are following HR's instruction to use PTO. He said he meant in November. I sent him the original email time-stamped this month. He sighed and said he never thought anyone would actually read the handbook. I used every hour, took my mom to lunch, and my plumber fixed the cursed sink at 3.40 while I drank tea. Next week, a new policy appeared. PTO must be requested in full-day increments during quarter end, and managers must respond in 24 hours. Thanks for clarifying, truly. The next one is an entitled People Story. I want to share a story about the ongoing battle I had with my inconsiderate neighbor. You see, I live on a sprawling piece of land that serves as my small farm, surrounded by ordinary homes of non-farming neighbors. Most of the time we coexist peacefully, but one neighbor in particular seemed to thrive on being an absolute jerk. He disregarded everyone around him, thinking only of himself. His frequent wild parties were a testament to his complete lack of respect. Every week his raucous gatherings would shake the foundations of the neighborhood. The loud music would blare into the night while he and his friends drowned themselves in alcohol. Their rowdy behavior spilled onto the streets, shattering the tranquility of our once peaceful enclave. As a farmer, I knew the importance of rising early to begin my day's work, and this incessant noise disrupted not only my routine, but also the lives of those who had regular jobs. But let me clarify that this story isn't primarily about the parties. Sadly, no one had taken action against them, as previous attempts to address the issue had failed. Instead, I want to focus on a different problem that arose from these gatherings, where the attendees chose to park their cars. Yes, they thought it was perfectly acceptable to invade my property and leave their vehicles there. I tried various approaches to address the issue. I confronted them, put up signs declaring it private property, but all my efforts fell on deaf ears. Eventually, I mustered the courage to approach my neighbor directly to discuss the parking situation. I chose not to mention the noise issue, as others had already tried to no avail. Instead, I wanted to concentrate on the parking problem. Me. Some of your guests parked on my property again last night. Neighbor. So? Me. Are you seriously suggesting that it's okay for them to do that? It's my property, and I'm kindly asking you to tell them not to park there. It's damaging my grass, and I simply don't want them there. Neighbor. I told them to park there. You have all that space, and they'll be gone before you even wake up. What's the big deal? Me. The big deal is that it's my property, and I'm telling you that they're not allowed to park there. Now, a couple of important points need clarification. Firstly, the cars would usually be gone or mostly gone by the time I began my day, meaning they were likely driving off my property while still intoxicated. It was nothing short of a miracle that no fences had been damaged at this point. Secondly, you might wonder why I hadn't called the police or had the cars towed, as is commonly suggested in such situations. Well, let me explain. I live in a small country area where the local police are utterly useless. I don't mean they lack the will to help, rather, they simply wouldn't come at all. And if they did, they could easily be bribed by anyone with enough money. As for towing the cars, we didn't have any tow trucks in our vicinity. There were a couple of tow yards where cars could be dropped off, but they lacked the necessary trucks and drivers. However, I had a stroke of luck. The manager of the local tow yard happened to be my cousin. I paid him a visit, and he shared a little-known secret. Some farmers, with their own equipment, could bring the cars to the tow yard themselves, and the owners would have to pay a hefty fine to reclaim them. Inspired by this information, I decided to give the guests one last chance. Call it a soft spot or a penchant for second chances, but I wanted to give people the benefit of the doubt until the very end. To make my intentions crystal clear, I erected a large sign on my property, boldly declaring that parking was prohibited and violators would face towing. I placed it precisely where the guests tended to park and awaited my neighbor's next party. It didn't take long for the party to commence, signaled by the booming music that echoed through the night. I didn't even need to keep a watchful eye. The noise alone told me they had arrived. After a few hours, I stepped outside and discovered 3 cars parked not only on my property, but directly in front of the sign. I fetched some chains, skillfully linking the cars together, and maneuvered my trusty farming truck. Apologies for not knowing the exact English term. Ready to tow all 3 vehicles. I carefully dragged them down the block to my cousin's tow yard, where he awaited their arrival. With a sense of satisfaction, I watched the cars being securely impounded. The final touch of revenge, however, came when the irate guests, fueled by alcohol and anger, stormed my front door alongside my obnoxious neighbor. They screamed about their missing cars, while I calmly pointed out the sign's warning and revealed the location of their impounded vehicles. Then, with a triumphant slam, I shut the door in their faces. It was a rare kind of satisfaction indeed. Now here's where the story takes an unexpected twist. A few days later, my cousin informed me that the car owners had come to retrieve their vehicles, grumbling and cursing him out, a typical occurrence in his line of work. They threatened to involve the police, but to their dismay, everything I had done was entirely legal. Both my cousin and I were safe from any repercussions. Word seemed to have spread about the consequences of parking on my property as the issue gradually diminished. In the few months that followed, I only encountered 1 or 2 stray cars trespassing on my land. In those instances, I promptly pointed out the sign's warning, and the drivers swiftly moved their vehicles. I understand that it's not a perfect ending, for my neighbor remains an insufferable jerk who continues to host late-night parties. Nevertheless, having reclaimed my property, I find solace in knowing that it's a significant victory until a solution is found for the rest of his disruptive behavior. The next one is a pro-revenge story. My now ex-wife Kate and I moved to an apartment in 2010. The house, a renovated townhouse, was split between 2 sides with 2 apartments on the bottom and 2 apartments upstairs, addresses ending in 126, 128 accordingly. I wasn't the biggest fan of the apartment, as it was a much older building than I had ever lived in, but I quickly adjusted to the wood creaking throughout the night. During the initial walkthrough, we noticed the only problem was a dip in the bathroom ceiling. The landlord, Jay, promised us he would get it fixed ASAP. Exactly 1 year after we moved in, There was a loud crash at 4 a.m. The bathroom ceiling had collapsed, with tiles and wood scattered all over the floor and in the bathtub. Kate, who was typically more aggressive, kept calling Jay throughout the day. When she finally got in touch with him around 9 p.m., she explained what happened and insisted it be fixed immediately. Jay rebuffed, yelling that his girlfriend was a lawyer and he didn't need to do anything. That's when I got mad. I went outside to have a cigarette and called him myself. I feigned a relaxed demeanor, and at first he tried to talk to me as a bro, and kept saying, "Dude, I'm gonna get someone out there, but it's gonna take a few weeks." When he couldn't sway me that way, he started yelling about his girlfriend and her knowledge of the law. Unbeknownst to him, I had read the tenant laws in my state. So, as he tried to lie, I waited until he finished and then recited the law stating that if an apartment was considered uninhabitable, the landlord needed to pay for the tenant to stay in a place until it was resolved, meaning he would have to pay for us to stay in a hotel of our choosing every night until the ceiling was fixed. He tried to say that our upstairs neighbor, Phil, was the super, but he wasn't sure if he could get him down there that night. He placed me on hold, then came back a few minutes later and said that Phil and his girlfriend were out of state. Please correct any grammar or spelling mistakes in this story below, but don't change any of the context or details, and remove special characters like emojis or brackets. I rang Phil's doorbell and asked, with Jay on speakerphone, if he was assigned as the super. He laughed and said no. Dejected, Jay said he would have people out there the next day. Previously, he said they were busy for at least 3 weeks. There's more to this incident, but it led to 2 conclusions. If you're going to lie, then there has to be consistency in your lie, and make sure that the people you lie to don't communicate with each other. This is where a feud started between Kate and me versus him and his mother. She was the original landlord and gave the house to him so he could begin to make a side profit. Fast forward to a year later. Jay stopped coming to the house and his mom began handling things. Around this time, my ex and I had been laid off, and we were working with Social Security for food, health, and housing insurance. We were approved for all 3 in April, but we wouldn't get the check until May. When our typical check wasn't in the landlord's mailbox, he immediately gave us a summons, saying that he was taking us to court for eviction. The day we went to court, he had no lawyer, and here's a non-verbatim account of how the case went. Judge, does the defense have a means to pay within 90 days of non-payment? Us. Yes, Your Honor. Hands over paperwork showing that he will be reimbursed for April and May. Judge, I see no problem. They are breaking no laws. Why are we here? Jay, well, Your Honor, they have been bullying. Judge, I don't care. Unless they are breaking a law, then this case is dismissed. Suffice it to say, Jay and his mother were not happy. Around this time in my life, things were tumultuous. My mother, who had been battling lung cancer for 4.5 years, succumbed to it in June. This happened at roughly the same time his mom came knocking, looking for payment. I explained that I would leave the check in the mailbox when we got back from the funeral home and asked her to please respect my right to mourn. She took her fingers and began rubbing them together, pretending to play the world's smallest violin. I will never forget what she said next. Ooh, my mommy just died. Woe is me. She probably had it coming. I don't care if your entire family is dead. I want my money. She smiled smugly, proud of what she had just said. I saw red and my heart jumped into my throat. I went, grabbed the check, and handed it to her in absolute shock that anyone would say something so messed up. She had finally managed to push a button that very few people I've known throughout my life have gotten close to pressing. I went into rage mode, but not in the way you would expect. The revenge. We were always told that if a health inspector came by, not to open the door. I waited until August since that was the month before the lease was going to run out, and we knew they would not extend a renewal. I walked up the block to town hall to ask for a health inspection of our property. It was scheduled for several days later. Now it's important to know several things. I was friends with all of the tenants. Phil had moved out with his fiancée, but the new tenant was a really cool girl around my age named Danny. Tom and Hannah, on the other side of the downstairs floor, had moved out in July, and Jay was still looking to fill it. The only one who wanted to stay out of this was Rose in the upper right apartment. I had gotten permission and her spare key, so I could let the inspector into Danny's apartment, and I knew that I could use the back staircase on the right side to let him into Tom's now vacant apartment. I also knew that Danny was moving out in September, a month after Kate and I. The inspector came, and it was glorious. He checked the exterior of the house first, noting that wires were exposed. There was an old empty dryer, along with other odd clutter, in the backyard. I brought him inside the shared entrance, and as I expected, he noticed that the last inspection dated back to 1994, 18 years ago. This meant that for each year he did not have an inspection, there would be appropriate fines. In our apartment, we had black mold growing in our bathroom, and the bulge in the ceiling had begun to regrow to problematic proportions. Upstairs, Danny's apartment was suffering from leaks in the ceiling, and it looked like her bathroom ceiling was also on the brink of collapsing. We then went to the basement. The boiler was on the verge of exploding. There were flammable items, along with gasoline and a pack of matches, sitting right beside it. Two things I did not know were: the fire door that separated the two sides did not close all the way, rendering it moot. To be honest, I had never heard of a fire door until that day. On the right, 128-portion basement side, there was a toilet that had exploded. It had coated the surrounding walls, and the leakage prevented us from going up to the floor via the right side. The entire time, the inspector was photographing and writing constantly. We stepped outside, and he said he needed to come back. When I asked why, he said he had run out of space to write down all of the infractions. He had filled the front and had written an entire page on the back. I kindly and coyly asked, "Well, how much will it cost right now?" He scratched his head and said, "Around 20-30K from what I can see, but it's probably going to be higher as this house was never licensed to be split into apartments." I thanked him, and he was going to come back with the county inspector. We were gone when that took place, though I did ask him to send me a copy with the list of violations to my new address. So we moved out at the end of August, but I got updates from Rose. Because he was the current owner, he owed all current fines, and no new tenants could move into the empty apartments until everything was up to code. With 3 out of 4 apartments vacant, he was losing $4,500 in potential rent. He handed the property back to his mother and had to file for bankruptcy. Now here's the other thing. Every time an old tenant left and a new one was coming in, an inspection was supposed to be done. Now that all of the financial burden fell on her, they looked into the records and found that she was fined for each time she had broken that rule. $750 per violation. By the end of the year, Rose had moved out, so the place was hemorrhaging money. I sat back, proud of what I had done, and left it be. Haha, no, screw that. I wasn't close to done yet. I felt like I had destroyed Jay, but my real target had always been his mom. I learned that she had 8 properties throughout 3 towns in my county. I went to each one, spoke to the tenants, and said I was a concerned tenant from another property. I asked if they had any problems with their apartments. Every person I asked described the apartment in very poor to intolerable conditions, and that the mom was effectively a slumlord. She would ignore problems unless someone threatened to summon the inspector or turn to litigation. More often than not, people would move out and she would refuse to return their deposits, sinking those into cosmetic repairs so that the apartment looked nicely furnished. People rarely fought back because she knew that the occupants were from the upper-lower class minorities. So, being the concerned person I was, I went to the inspector of the other 2 towns and asked for an inspection to be done, with at least one tenant, if not more, awaiting the inspector's visit. Turns out, she faced pretty much the same infractions in every apartment she owned. It turned out she actually had 12 apartments, but I initially only knew about the ones that fell within my county. The remaining properties in the next county over received a mysterious heads-up to perform a surprise inspection. From what I can tell, Jay's mom had been in the landlord business for about 35-40 years. That collapsed quickly. Since we moved literally 1 block down the road from our old one, 54, I got to see Jay lose his primary source of income and have to claim bankruptcy. But I also saw that his mother was desperately trying to find a buyer for all of the apartments so she could pay off the fines. I learned 2 years later, 2014, that she, too, had to file for bankruptcy. Jay and his mother camped out in front of our next apartment for 2 days in October 2013 before she filed for bankruptcy. I'm guessing to scream at me, and/or Kate. So I called the cops and said that there were strange people standing in a no-parking zone and they kept looking up at the 2nd floor. A cruiser swung by and told them to leave. I know I should have used the 2 months I spent monitoring everything to find a new job, but this was the one and only time I wanted to cripple a person where it hurt the most. Their wallets. I think I got my point across. None of this would have happened if you had just ducking fixed the ceiling before it collapsed, Jay. The next one is a petty revenge story. A few months ago, I volunteered to plan my Mill's 60th birthday and my Fiel's 64th birthday, which was a weekend in wine country. I had made a reservation for a group of 10 at a new upscale restaurant months beforehand. Because it was also a winery, we arrived 2 hours early and checked in with the restaurant to see if they could seat us earlier. Despite the empty restaurant, they said they couldn't. We understood that they could be understaffed, so we went and got some wine, hung out, and listened to live music. Close to our reservation time, I received a text from that restaurant asking us to be seated. It was beginning to rain. We walked over to the hostess, who informed us that due to the rain and our table being outdoors, they would not be able to seat us tonight. As calmly as I could, I explained that I had a reservation for months, had been there for 2 hours, and was not informed that my reservation was for an outdoor table or subject to rain. There was no indoor-outdoor option. I also explained that it was for a 60th and 64th birthday party. I asked if they could split us up between tables, but they kept saying there was nothing they could do and that it wasn't their fault, because we can't control the weather. I snapped a little and sharply said, well, what you could have done was not reserve a table for a large party that you couldn't guarantee. The manager just shrugged. We left, and because it was Saturday at 6 p.m., there was no way we would get a seat at another restaurant. I had to go to the grocery store and cook a full meal for 10 people. I emailed the manager to ask if there was anything they could comp because our experience was so terrible. I received no response after a week, so I created multiple Gmail accounts and left 10 different one-star reviews for the fairly new restaurant. In the reviews, I mentioned that you should never book this restaurant for a large party, how they did not try to find us a table at another restaurant, how they had 2 hours to fix their error, that they booked a table they couldn't guarantee, and that they didn't move a table undercover, even though there was plenty of space. They also didn't provide any comps or make any attempt to fix their error. Due to my reviews, their Google rating dropped by 2 stars. I left 1 review for each person who didn't get a seat. Several days after posting the reviews, they reached out and offered to comp a meal for my in-laws if our group took the reviews down. I refused their offer. The next one is an entitled people story. For context, I just lost my mom to lung cancer this past Sunday after getting her home for at-home care just 2 days prior. I've been taking care of everything since then, including her beloved cat, while dealing with my own grief. The funeral home let me write the obituary due to how frazzled I was when we met with them. I only named those who I felt were closest to her, even double-checked with 2 of them. Confident with it, I sent it to the funeral home, and they didn't edit it further, posting it on their site immediately. Now on to what happened. I decided to take it easy since I'd been running on fumes for the better part of the week, sort of waiting for people to get back to me on some important matters. So, while I'm just relaxing with my furry little brother, I get a phone call. Caller ID shows it's my grandmother on my mom's ex-husband's side. I answer, and she asks why I didn't name that ex-husband, aka her precious angel. I respond honestly, I couldn't figure out a good way to do so. This so-called relative of mine proceeds to get upset, saying that it'll hurt him. She pretty much demands I edit the obituary to include this man who left us when I was 3 and hardly ever paid child support. He hasn't even bothered to get my number and call me to see how I, his so-called daughter, am doing. I calmly explained to her that I couldn't edit it. It's up on their site and out of my hands. She got mouthy with me and then told me to think about it before hanging up. Thankfully, the rest of the family is on my side and will chew her ass out. Now I have a migraine and feel more exhausted. And no, this isn't the first time she's tried to speak up for her son. The last time she did it around me, I was 16, and I called her out on it. I might update if anything interesting comes from this, but don't get your hopes up. Right now, I'm going to chill. The next one is an entitled parent story. There's a 10-and-a-half-year age gap between me and my little sister. When I was a teen, I often used to take her to the local park to give my mom a break or give her time to get some housework done, etc. At the time this story happened, I was 15. It was Wimbledon season, so my mom asked me to take my sister to the park for a few hours so she could watch it in peace. She gave me some money so we could get some fish and chips in town, and some ice cream at the park. There was usually an ice cream van there. So we got some fish and chips, went to the beach for a bit to buy Mom extra time, and then we headed to the park. As we approached the park gate, this EM who was dragging along her child glared at me. EM, you should be ashamed. I looked around, but there was nobody else she could have been talking to. Dumbfounded, I blankly pointed to myself as if to affirm she was talking to me. EM, girls these days are such sluts, opening their legs to anyone who asks. Who got you knocked up? Or let me guess, you don't know? I stared blankly at her for a minute. Me. This is my little sister. EM rolled her eyes and leered at me. EM, yeah, we had little sisters in my day too. I just said, okay, bye, and walked away because I was uncomfortable with conflict and just wanted out of that situation. EM, don't you dare go into the park. You'll spread your filthy diseases all over the park. I don't want my son catching your diseases. I ignored her and rushed into the park. Surely she'd leave me alone when I was surrounded by other kids and parents, right? Wrong. EM followed me around the park, demanding that I leave. The more I ignored her, the madder she got, and she kept repeating over and over, get out, you're not allowed here. At this point, a few parents noticed. One mom, let's call her FM friend, Mom, who my mom and I often chatted with, immediately stood and rushed over, just as EM grabbed my arm and yanked at me. FM, why are you grabbing a child? Let her go, who are you? EM, mind your business. FM, let her go or I'm calling the police. EM let me go but turned her anger towards FM, shouting that she was just making the park safe for her child, and I shouldn't be here because I might spread some nasty disease all over the place. She never specified what disease. I'm guessing she meant an STI or something. More parents started coming over to see what was going on. Seeing she was outnumbered, EM eventually left, dragging her child behind her, screaming obscenities at us as she slinked away. FM gave us a lift home to make sure we were safe. When I told my mom what happened, she was furious. She packed us into the car and drove us around town to look for the woman, but we didn't spot her. Thankfully, I never saw the woman again. The next one is an entitled People Story. It seems silly to be upset over a mailbox, but I guess that some people just don't have anything else better to do. Silly me for thinking that I could try and outsmart the homeowners associations, I guess. You see, I am an art teacher for elementary kids, and I guess you could describe me as eccentric. I don't like boring, plain stuff. Normal stuff that blends in, I guess you can. I bet you're reading this and wondering why the hell I chose to live in homeowners associations then. Well, my husband has a nice paying job, much nicer than my teacher's salary, and I enjoy the area that we live in. Besides, the inside of my house is such an expression of who I am, and that is more important to me than the outside of my house. Maybe I was too entitled, thinking I could get away with a different colored mailbox. See, our old mailbox was so plain and white and boring. It had no personality to it. And well, to me, that's just not okay. So I did what any normal person would do. I decided to paint it a different color. I painted it a lightish pink color, almost had a beige tint to it. I then painted some leaves and flowers on the mailbox. Nothing too fancy, just very minimal small little paintings. I should have known better that our homeowners association's president was going to flip her lid when she saw it. In my defense, though, I did choose paint colors that were deemed acceptable. But of course, the homeowners associations always pushes the brown or black mailboxes. It was literally the next day when I found my mailbox destroyed. I was actually kind of sad. Now I knew that our homeowners association's president was pushy, aggressive, and annoying, but it never even once crossed my mind that she destroyed it. As a matter of fact, I thought maybe some hooligans broke into the neighborhood and were messing around. Until I noticed that everything else in the neighborhood was sound, and my mailbox was the only one that was broken. It looked like someone had hit it with a bat or was strong enough to knock it over. It was just on the ground laying on its side. I started wondering if there was a possibility that the homeowners associations had something to do with this. They hadn't given me a warning or anything, and if the president or any of the board members got caught vandalizing property, they could definitely get in trouble. Surely they wouldn't risk that. Well, I knew I was wrong with thinking that when I replaced the mailbox, this time with no paintings, it was just a solid light pink, when I got a note at my door suggesting that I replace it with a black one or a brown one. And then my suspicions were confirmed even further when the president knocked on my door, asking to speak to me about my mailbox. Homeowners associations. President, are you aware your mailbox is not in compliance? Me. Well, actually, I checked the guidelines and it doesn't say anything about light pink. As a matter of fact, it just says no bright or bold colors. Mine is a pretty soft pink, don't you think? Homeowners associations. Everyone else on your street has a black or brown mailbox. You're breaking the rules by not complying. Me. Then write me a fine instead of breaking my mailbox and harassing me at the door. And with that, I slammed the door shut in her face. Now, I knew that she wouldn't stop there. I even considered the possibility that she would destroy my mailbox again, even though I had no proof she was the one that destroyed it in the first place. So, I asked my husband to purchase and install a security camera that could sync with our phones. And guess what? My bright idea paid off because 3 days later, I never changed the mailbox this time. I got a notification that my camera picked up motion. And sure enough, there was our beloved Homeowners Association's president, on my camera, caught, destroying my mailbox with a metal baseball bat. I was so pissed. If I was really breaking the rules, why not just fine me like every other Homeowners Association's violation? Sure, I was pissed, and it was clear that this was turning into harassment, so I decided to replace my mailbox again. I figured that she was going to destroy it again, and then I would have multiple instances caught on video of her destroying the mailbox. This way I could turn her into the police. Except the third time, she made it pretty easy because multiple neighbors witnessed what happened next and called 911. She knocked on my door a couple of days after, and it went from 0 to 100 really quick. Homeowners associations? Prez, I see that you still haven't changed your mailbox. Are you sure you want to keep playing this game? Me. No one is playing a game except for you. And it's not a game. It's harassment. Leave me alone. Like I said, if I really am breaking a rule, then you should write me a fine. But you haven't, so I'm assuming that I'm not actually breaking any rules and you just want to be a bully. Homeowners associations. Wow, you're brave. Listen, all you have to do is change your mailbox and I'll leave you alone. Me. Leave me alone now or I'll report you to the Homeowners Associations Board and the police. Can't harass people if you're behind bars. Now, I was slightly joking because I'm pretty sure it's impossible to get imprisoned for verbal harassment and vandalism. I don't know. But either way, she didn't like this. As a matter of fact, she pulled a gun on me. And no, I'm not joking. She yanked a gun out of her waistband and pointed it at me before telling me that I would regret saying those words to her. I really thought she was going to shoot me, and I was so bewildered. And over a freaking mailbox. Well, she put the gun back in her waistband before trying to run off. However, neither she nor I noticed that several of our neighbors were outside, and 2 of them were watching. One of the neighbors blocked her path while the other called the police. Of course, now she starts panicking because she realizes that she's been caught. I'm not sure if she noticed the security camera either, but this meant that not only did I have footage of her vandalizing my mailbox, but I also had footage of her pointing a gun at me. And yep, this was enough to land her 3 years in jail. She would be eligible for parole after a year, but she was forbidden to go near me or even step foot in our neighborhood. This meant that not only was she not allowed to come back into the neighborhood after she got out of jail, but it meant that she couldn't serve in the homeowners associations. And not just our homeowners associations, she couldn't serve in any homeowners associations because she had been found guilty of a crime. And to think all this because of a mailbox. The next one is a pro-revenge story. So I am not sure if this belongs in pro-revenge since it wasn't planned on my part. It kind of just fell into my lap. Feels more than petty, so here I am. For a bit of background, my next-door neighbor was a college student. She lives with our actual neighbor, her boyfriend. Typical crazy college kid, weekend parties, drinking on her patio at all hours of the night and weird hours. You know the drill. I figured she was trying to experience college life, so why not? You do you, lady. Anyway, one summer night last year, she was sitting out on her back patio with her girlfriends doing their drunk thing. I am out wrapping up some stuff with my toddler daughter. At the time, she had a medical issue going on that caused her to walk a little weird. Nothing life-altering and something that would heal with time. She did have a wobble to her, especially when running. Sometimes she would fall right over. She was out running around with the dog, and the ladies next door were waving and telling her how cute she was. All good. We go back inside, and I hand her off real quick to the husband. I want to go to the bedroom real fast to change the sheets for later bed. I hurry up. Now, to set the scene, my bedroom is the closest to the patio next door. The windows are open because it gets super hot in there, even with AC during the day, and the lights are off. I can do this by the light of the hallway, I figure. I can clearly hear what they are talking about next door. Do you see the way she was walking? What a little retard! My little retard, my little retard, sung to the cheerful tune of My Little Pony, I guess because that was what my kid had been wearing. This was followed by sounds I suppose my neighbor felt a mentally challenged child would make, and uproarious laughter. No, you, ducking, did not. They didn't realize anyone could hear them, but I had the lights flipped on and was at the window and shouting in record time. Stay right there, you idiots! Ducking dead silence as they realized someone heard them. I come flying down the stairs where I am intercepted by my husband, who has no idea what the screaming was about. At this point, I am so mad that I just burst out into tears when telling him. We both decide it would be better to wait to confront until tomorrow. Everyone next door is wasted, and there is no way of telling just how many people she has over. Besides, when we looked outside, it seems like they have packed it in for the night. Not long after this, we all go to bed. My husband was outside having a last smoke before sleep. Next door idiot had sent her boyfriend out to put the fire pit out. Guess she was too chicken crap to do it herself, as she usually would. My husband and he were talking. Boyfriend. That got crazy earlier, huh? Husband. Well, your girlfriend did make fun of a child. So understanding that as her parents we are upset shouldn't be too hard. Boyfriend. Ah man, you know how girls that age. My neighbor happens to date much younger women. No judgment, but it's not a defense for how they acted. Are when they are drinking. They say crap and don't mean it. All little girls are like that when drunk. Husband. I've drunk with a lot of women and have never heard of one of them making fun of a kid behind their back. A 2-year-old no less. So yeah, that excuse doesn't fly with me. Boyfriend. Look, dude, I don't want any drama. Just ducking, let it go. Husband. Sure, just let your girlfriend know we are waiting for her heartfelt apology. Boyfriend. Whatever. Needless to say, the boyfriend is going with whatever keeps getting him that sweet drunk pussy. Not a drop of compassion, even though he is a nurse. Ducking awesome. Hope you don't work in the children's ward, a-hole. Husband came in after that. I waited for a week to confront her about it because I thought that what she did was so shameless that she would surely feel bad. Nope. I happened to be outside one day watering when she was coming back from wherever. Gave her the stare down. All she could muster was, "Got a problem, idiot? Do something about it," before making her way inside. The revenge turns out that little Miss My Crap Doesn't Stink wanted to be a policewoman in our town. How do I know? They sent a letter to people on our street to get their opinion before accepting her into their program. Just a standard questionnaire asking about our dear neighbor friend. Do you have an opinion on why or why not your neighbor would not make a good officer of the law? Why, yes. Yes, I do. I wrote a ducking essay, you guys, complete with photos of her lovely patio covered in cans and bottles from the night before. Their dogs having to sit outside in the pouring rain all day. I guess animal control is too busy around here for that. How do you feel about someone on your force that makes fun of kids with handicaps? Who could possibly show up to work drunk? I sent it back and just forgot about it. It was petty, yes, but felt so good. I say this because last night I heard her crying to one of her buddies about how she couldn't seem to break into the local police force, which had been the whole reason she had pursued her major in college. She isn't sure what to do now. Now, I am not sure if my letter did it. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. I am not sure if they tell you why you aren't being considered, other than you are not. In that moment, though, I felt vindicated. Duck you, you soulless idiot. Hope those jokes at my kid's expense were worth it. The next one is a petty revenge story. So this story takes place in the mid-2000s when I was in secondary school, which is basically high school for you Yankee Doodle dandies. I was 13 and going through that awkward stage in life where everything is constantly changing. One thing that was changing was the amount of gas my body created after a particularly long series of curries and chilies that my family made regularly, as they were cheap and easy meals to cook. Plus, despite being as English as Paddington Bear, we loved spicy food. The story takes place during a series of French classes where I had a showdown with a very petty French teacher whom we'll call Mrs. F. She regularly put kids in detention for everything, and while some of it was justified, like talking in class or not doing homework, she decided that because I occasionally farted in class, despite being a half-decent student who was courteous and polite, it was enough to put me in detention if someone smelled it and made a fuss. I tried everything to avoid this woman's wrath, from sitting at the back of the class near an open window to asking my parents if I could have something less likely to cause flatulence. However, despite my efforts, I kept receiving detention without any obvious disciplinary issues. The school wasn't obligated to inform parents why I received detention, and the teacher didn't want to share, I think. For a while I kept it hidden since both of my parents worked until I got home anyway, and I generally thought they couldn't do anything about it. That changed when I was put into after-school detention on my 14th birthday. Now, my parents always made a fuss about my birthdays since it was close to Christmas, and they knew I liked having a day when I could choose anything for dinner and do whatever I wanted all night long. This detention was scheduled to last for 2 hours, so there was no way I would be getting home before my mom and dad, and they were furious when they found out that I had been losing break times, lunch times, and hours of my home life to this woman's insanity in her efforts to get me to stop farting. My dad, who was home after my mom every day, asked my brother where my mom and I were, as my mother had come to get me after calling the school to find out I was in after-school detention. She had planned to take us all out for a paid reservation at an Italian restaurant since my favorite food is and always has been lasagna. While my dad was frantically trying to change the reservation or get the money back to no avail, my mom was picking me up. When she found out that my dad had failed to get the money back or change the time, she wasn't happy. However, she was furious when she found out everything about why I was in detention and how much time I had spent in it. Keep in mind that until this point, I had disguised my after-school detentions as extra work for school projects, so I was regularly just given bus money and told it was fine. This time, though, I thought I'd try getting my French teacher to be nice since it was my birthday, but there was no chance. The following day, after my birthday, my mom took the day off work, and I was called into the school office to have a sit-down with my French teacher and the headmistress. My mom let me speak first, and I innocently asked my mom if I was trying not to disturb anyone, but sometimes it just happens. The headmistress asked Mrs. F what compelled her to think that flatulence in class was worth so much punishment, to which she replied that I needed to learn to control myself. My mom then went on about how much money the family had spent getting me home from school because I couldn't take the 3 o'clock bus that my bus pass covered. They had to spend close to £15 a week to get me home. She also mentioned the cost of her workday that she had to take off and the reservation they lost on my birthday. Then she did something I didn't see coming. She pulled out a pile of bus tickets, receipts, and a pay stub from work to demonstrate the costs she had incurred, and she asked, "So is the school paying me for all this, or are you? Because I'm holding both responsible for the cost." In total, between the bus tickets, lost reservation, and pay for the day, it was about £250. Mrs. F then boldly stated, "I'll discipline your child until he learns that he will not disturb the class with his disgusting body." I shrunk a little at this statement, but then my headmistress said something I'll never forget. She said, "Don't worry about these costs. Mrs. F will be paying for them in full out of her pocket before you leave today if she wants to keep her job. It's clear to me that your child is not being a bad kid, just a little bit gassy. Mrs. F, if you wish to put any child in detention from now on, I'll be reviewing it before approving the detention, as it is clear that you are abusing your power as a teacher. Now pay this lady her money and get back to work." With that, Mrs. F was fuming and agreed to pay my mother out of her paycheck. The school office handed the money over to my mother, who proceeded to spend it on extra Christmas presents for me and my older brother that year. Oh, and as for my mom's petty revenge, she told me to sit in front of Mrs. F's desk and regularly fed me anything that would make me pass gas, leaving her unable to punish me again. The next one is an entitled people story. My husband's youngest brother, Jim, recently married in June to his girlfriend of 6 years, Kathy. They had a long engagement of 2 years because there was a 6-year gap, and my in-laws were worried about Kathy's lack of maturity. I have been with my husband, Tim, for 14 years. We have 2 kids, a 13-year-old boy and a 9-year-old girl. Both kids love Kathy and Jim. Once they got engaged, I offered to help with whatever they needed for the wedding out of kindness. I was thinking more along the lines of helping with DIY projects, etc. Since Kathy and Jim had a low budget for the wedding, I thought maybe my husband and I could give them something really nice for their house. She and my mother-in-law called me in May and asked for my son, daughter, and husband to be in the wedding party. No big deal, except they had to wear a specific color. I was irritated because getting this color from David's Bridal was going to be expensive. Thankfully, I found a Flower Girls dress from Amazon that was almost the same color. The ties were exclusive to DB, so we paid an extra $30 to get them in 5 weeks. During the call, she also mentioned that my husband and I should pay for their honeymoon, since we could easily afford it, and we wouldn't have to get them another gift. Naturally, I asked, "Where do you plan on going for your honeymoon?" She said, "Sandals Resorts." I had heard of these resorts, seen the commercials, and knew in my gut that it was going to be very expensive. So I asked her how much a sandals resort would cost. She said $5,600. She went on about how much it would cement their union, how Jim needed a break from work, and again, how we could afford it. I had an out-of-body experience. I laughed like a hyena, hysterically, while she remained silent on the phone. Realizing she was serious, I told her absolutely not. We would not be funding her entire honeymoon. Heck, my hubby and I never had a honeymoon like that. She proceeded to cry and said I was going to ruin her vision for her wedding, that I didn't care about her, and then hung up. I told my husband later to call his brother and ask him what the hell was going on. He just said Kathy was planning everything, so he didn't know what was happening. The day before the wedding was a nightmare as well. On the day of the wedding, my kids ended up getting chiggers from being out in the random woods. She yelled at those who didn't contribute to her honeymoon fund, and her kid sister ate 26 out of the 45 cupcakes for the reception. And to top it all off, her photographer lost her wedding photos. The next one is an entitled parents story. So back in high school, one of my closest friends got pregnant and gave birth to the sweetest baby boy. She stopped going to school for a while to take care of her kid, but still did online school so she could graduate with her class. One thing we would do is go to one of the local food places near the high school on Fridays, and today we decided to go to this nice Chinese place that I frequent regularly, and the little old Asian lady knows me by name. This Chinese place has a sticker on the front door that says something like, "Breastfeeding will always be allowed," which is great since that's what my friend is more comfortable doing for her baby. After we ordered our food and hung out in this little waiting area, the baby gets all fussy. She takes out the little cover and covers her baby and her chest as she starts to feed him. We keep talking until this woman and her son, who had to be around 10, come in. I recognize the kid as one of the kids I looked after when I used to volunteer at a youth center. He comes up to me and starts talking to me, and then asks my friend what she's doing with the baby. Before my friend could answer, the boy's mother cuts in. "A disgusting thing is what she's doing. Don't you know better than to do that in public? And why are you even doing that if you're only a kid?" My friend has an attitude sometimes, so I try to jump in before she would start to throw things. It's not illegal, and Mrs. L is fine with it. She has a sticker on the door. Mrs. L being the little old Asian lady by the counter who was just ogling the baby a second ago. She smiles at us and continues to write some stuff down. The mother wasn't happy about this and continues with her BS. "I'm sorry, but I'm just not okay with a baby breastfeeding another baby. Can you please just stop?" she says in frustration. Mrs. L finally cuts in, and in her broken English she says, "Nursing a baby is a beautiful thing. You have a problem, you leave." She then taps the order on the window that leads to the kitchen and apologizes to my friend for the woman's nasty behavior. She then looks at the boy who is still next to me and says jokingly, "Your mother, she dummy, right?" This makes the boy laugh, and the mother just grumbles in her seat, trying to stay as far from us as she could. When my friend finished and we grabbed our food, Mrs. L threw in an extra order of eggs rolled, since they were my friend's favorite. Everything was fine until Monday came, and I saw the boy again. He pulls me off to the side and tells me that his mom said she doesn't like me or my friend. I just ask him if he still likes me, and he says yes. Yay! The next one is an entitled People Story. It's been 3 blissful years since I married the love of my life, Rich, and together we embarked on the journey of homeownership. Our cozy abode became our sanctuary, a place where we nurtured our dreams and built a life together. The only shadow looming over our happiness was my mother-in-law, Karen, who harbored deep-rooted prejudices against me. Her disapproval stemmed from my humble African-American background, as my parents had worked tirelessly to provide for our family despite their meager means. Karen's disdain for me was evident from the beginning, as she openly declared that I wasn't worthy of her precious son. Despite this animosity, I always strived to maintain harmony in the family, not wanting to create unnecessary conflict or force Rich to choose sides. Regrettably, Karen didn't reciprocate my efforts and frequently ignited confrontations. Driven by compassion, we offered Karen a temporary stay in our home when she faced financial difficulties. The early days seemed uneventful, but subtle signs of intrusion began to surface. Personal belongings went missing or were tampered with, and a sense of violation infiltrated our sanctuary. Trusting my intuition, I confronted Karen about her behavior, but she vehemently denied any wrongdoing.
In a shocking turn of events, she even resorted to calling the authorities, falsely accusing me of a crime. Although the police found no evidence against me, Karen's sinister actions persisted. One fateful day, I discovered a slashed tire on my car, a calculated attempt to sabotage my routine and jeopardize my job. Undeterred by her malevolence, I managed to rectify the situation swiftly and salvage my employment. It was apparent that Karen's efforts were aimed at driving a wedge between Rich and me, despite the fact that our love thrived independently of our work situations. Her relentless assault on my life continued when she gained access to my phone and manipulated it to disrupt my daily routine. Disguised as me, she sent a resignation message to my boss, attempting to dismantle my professional stability. Grateful for my understanding employer who saw through the deception, I resolved to protect my personal boundaries and prevent Karen from wreaking further havoc. With unwavering love and determination, Rich and I confronted the toxic influence Karen wielded over our lives. Recognizing the urgency, Rich spoke to his mother, urging her to find employment and become self-reliant. Unfortunately, Karen stubbornly resisted his pleas, leaving us with no choice but to provide her with additional time under our roof. To offer respite from the mounting tension, Rich and I planned a much-needed getaway to a picturesque lakeside cabin. Surrounded by serenity, we reveled in each other's company, hoping that this break would motivate Karen to reassess her choices. Energized by nature's beauty, we returned home, eager to reclaim our haven. However, as we attempted to unlock our front door, the keys no longer fit, sending chills down our spines. Bewildered, I questioned whether Karen had altered the locks, an act that defied logic and common decency. Knocking on our own door, Karen appeared, greeting Rich warmly while pointedly ignoring my presence. Shockingly, she declared that monkeys like me were not welcome in our own home and encouraged Rich to divorce me. Fueled by a righteous anger, Rich vehemently pushed past Karen and stormed inside, demanding answers. Determined not to be cast aside, I followed him, prompting Karen to erupt into a frenzied fit of rage. Dialing emergency services, she summoned the police, fabricating a narrative that painted me as an intruder. Fortunately, one of the responding officers had been a former co-worker, and their presence offered a glimmer of hope. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the police swiftly uncovered Karen's deceptive machinations. They questioned her about changing the locks while we were away, and she denied any involvement despite our inability to enter the house. Concern turned to horror when, driven by madness, Karen launched a vicious attack, brandishing a hammer she had used in her misdeeds. With a swift response, the officers subdued Karen, restraining her and ensuring our safety. Bound by love and an unyielding commitment to justice, Rich and I resolved to press charges against Karen, even though she was his own mother. Her betrayal had reached unforgivable heights, and the consequences of her actions could no longer be ignored. As the truth emerged, we discovered Karen had intentionally deceived us, hiding a substantial amount of savings while exploiting our compassion. Her calculated plan had aimed to dismantle our marriage, using our own kindness against us. Yet despite her relentless efforts, she had failed. Love had triumphed over hate, and Karen would now face the consequences of her deceitful and malicious actions. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Alright, so this is my first post to this sub because this is the first time I have a worthwhile story. I also apologize for the formatting. Please bear with me. My father told me this story at my granddad's wake. Some backstory about my granddad. He grew up in Depression-era Virginia and slaved away in the coal mines in order to make ends meet. His only way out was to join the Marine Corps, so he did. He fought in Korea and left the Corps soon after the war ended. He then somehow managed to get a job as a high school football coach in a county in SEW, Virginia, despite no prior experience. This was fortuitous, since he happened to have a knack for it. He went on to coach for 35 years at the same school, racking up hundreds of games and a good win-to-loss ratio, while burning through wives and fighting Gamecocks on the side, making a pretty penny at this as well. His career was going pretty good until they merged the school he was coaching at with one from a neighboring town. Due to the merger, there was only room for one head coach at this new super school, and the choice was between my granddad, who had 35 years of experience and by now almost 1,000 games to his name, and a guy with a poor win-loss record and only 150 games to his credit. Obviously, the school board chose the inexperienced guy. My granddad complained to the school district about this terrible, terrible decision, and in response, they relieved him of all coaching duties and shoved him into teaching an 8th grade health science class. Now bear in mind, they did this to a man who had fought communists in Korea, had 3 teeth drilled out without anesthesia, fought gamecocks, and always managed to charm the cops into leaving him alone, and had survived working in coal mines in the 1940s. By now, the man had no ducks to give. My dad, at the time, was the starting quarterback for the school's football team, so he witnessed the ensuing battle firsthand. My granddad decided that he didn't want to teach 8th grade health science and decided to make the school board suffer. The man never got sick and never took a day off in his entire career, so he had quite a few leave days saved up. He decided to take them all at once. For the entire first semester, he only showed up to class on Mondays. The district brought suit against him, but when the case went up in front of a judge, he looked at what they had done to provoke my granddad and promptly told them to duck off. So for the next year and a half, my granddad only taught his classes once a week and cost the school board tens of thousands of dollars in substitute teacher fees, all the while fighting gamecocks and talking his way out of trouble in his newfound free time, in addition to getting full sick pay. He nearly single-handedly bankrupted the entire district for pissing him off. Finally, halfway through the next school year, the district offered him his old job back. He politely declined, tendered his resignation, and almost immediately got snatched up by a district in the next county over. 0 ducks given. I miss this man. The next one is a petty revenge story. This year, I got a new job that has been paying me very well. Therefore, for this Christmas, I decided to splurge on everyone. In particular, I spent a lot of my money on my 9-year-old daughter, and she deserves it 100%. She has been pushing herself in school, helping around the house without being asked, and always being the kindest soul you'll ever meet. However, when my mother-in-law came early in the morning and saw that the gifts under our tree were much more than usual, she asked why. I told her I bought everyone a bunch of gifts, including her. She then proceeded to ask how many gifts I got my daughter, and I told her about 3 big gifts and 3 mini ones. Apparently this outraged her because she started saying that a 9-year-old did not deserve that many gifts and she would be taking away the gift she bought my daughter so that my daughter wouldn't be too spoiled. I told her that was unfair, especially since my mother-in-law promised my daughter a doll for Christmas, and my daughter was looking forward to it. My mother-in-law said, "Let it be a lesson to my daughter that in life she can't get all the things she asks for. Look, I understand that, but it's not like I shower my daughter in gifts every day. And if anything, Christmas is the day you are supposed to spoil your children. But my wife told me to let it go, and it was her mother's gift so she could do anything she wanted with it. And her mother agreed, saying it was her right. And if we were going to play with that ideology, then so be it." I decided to remove the $600 a designer bag I got my mother-in-law, the thing I knew she wanted the most, and gave her a $40 robe instead. Once my mother-in-law opened her present, she was disappointed and asked if that was all from me, because everyone else got increasingly more expensive gifts from me. And I said yes, and apologized if I disappointed her, but we can't always get the gifts we hoped for. This left both her and my wife extremely furious. But, hey, the mother-in-law got enough gifts. I wouldn't want to spoil her. The next one is a petty revenge story. I used to work in a call center where everyone had little cubicles. You could chat with people on either side or behind you if things got slow, but anyone on the other side of the divider was sort of hard to see or chat with. This is only important because Karen was in this hard-to-see location from me. I have issues with overheating, medical stuff. I like to sit right under the AC vent. Nobody fought me for this because it was a little too cold for most people. Well, being a woman, this meant that sometimes I had some nipple protrusion issues on some days. It's perfectly natural, and to most people not noticeable because it was under my shirt and bra. Karen noticed this and made a report to HR. The HR woman and my direct supervisor paraded me through the cubicles and into their office to question me about my nipples. Now, I could have thrown a fit about this to begin with since we didn't actually have a dress code, and it's none of their damn business. They asked me to prove I was wearing a bra, so I showed them the straps. They told me, good enough, basically, and asked me to go back to my desk. I refused to go back. I said I needed to file a complaint about someone. They asked me who I was reporting. I said, I don't know, but you do. I want to report whoever it was that's been staring at my breasts all day. Now that I know someone is staring, I feel like this is a hostile work environment. They acted like I was joking at first until I said, if you don't have a talk with them, I will go over your heads and report you for forcing me to reveal my bra to you. I got escorted back to my desk and Karen was sitting there looking smug until they escorted her to the HR office instead. I don't know what happened to her in the office, and I didn't care. They did their part by having their talk with her. All I really wanted was to know who did it. Since it was a very slow day, all my coworkers started asking me what that was all about. Office gossip, you know? I told everyone exactly what had happened and added that Karen must be fascinated with my breasts since she noticed. Everyone else confirmed they didn't even notice. When she came back from HR, every person in the room knew what she had done and was glaring at her. Snitches didn't get stitches and didn't get fired either, but they got treated like the Karen they were. Nobody would talk to her. People would be chatting, see her come try to join the conversation and go silent and turn away from her. Some people did loud whispers and made comments like, "Shh, don't say anything, she will report you." She quit about 2 weeks later. The next one is an entitled People story. In the past, I've made posts about my jerk of a brother, but this time something else happened. I decided to go camping again for the first time this year because of spring break. Though I only got the weekend to go, it was just enough for me to unwind. My brother didn't follow me like he used to. I think I've finally gotten him to understand that screwing with me is just not worth it anymore after he drank that growler full of laxative-spiked beer he stole from me last year. So the drama from him hasn't been as bad for the past few months, though he's still an entitled jerk, and I've got plenty of things to tell about him and his antics from the months I wasn't posting. I figured my worries about camping trouble were over. But no, I had to deal with a lunatic Karen. I'd already spent one night at my campsite. I was loving the fresh air, and fortunately rain was minimal. That's the only reason I went. Otherwise I would have just stayed home, but I had an itch to scratch to get out and enjoy some mountain air. I was far from alone as the spaces around me were full of tents, trailers, and RVs. Plenty of people caught the camping bug during spring break, just like I did. I was sitting relaxed in a folding lawn chair and watching Tailspin on my portable DVD player. Yeah, I know it's a cartoon, and an old one at that. But I enjoy it since, as a kid, I used to watch some old tapes of it a cousin had, and I've owned the DVDs of the complete series for around 10 years. And I won't deny I've always had a bit of a crush on the character Rebecca Cunningham. I had headphones on because other campers were playing music, barbecuing, and doing other things. I was just chilling and letting myself mentally zone out with some refreshing cold beer when I got a sudden and hard tap on my shoulder that frankly scared the piss out of me for a second. And then I turned around to see a roughly middle-aged woman in over-tight purple yoga pants with her hands on her hips. She didn't have the Karen haircut, but she did have the bleach blonde hair and overly large bug-eye sunglasses. I know in this situation a lot of people will reflexively say, "Can I help you?" But that's just giving an opening to these people to say whatever they want. So my first reaction is to just angrily say, "What? Can't you see I'm trying to relax by myself?" That set her aback for a second. She didn't go away, so I paused the episode I was on and grumpily asked her what she was bothering me about. She spoke up in a matter-of-fact way that sounded like she was trying to be in charge. I guess trying to activate mom mode on a stranger, but I think the unfriendly scowl on my face was enough to show that I'm not exactly friendly. So she just pointed at the portable DVD player and said that she wanted to borrow it and the headphones for her daughter. To make it brief, I said no. And no is a complete sentence because I don't know her. I don't know if she'd bring it back, and I certainly don't know if her kid wouldn't damage it. I do actually keep a smaller backup portable DVD player in the camper too, but I wasn't about to let this woman know that. Well, she certainly didn't take being told off like that well, and then launched into a tirade about how I was a grown man watching cartoons, how they only have one TV in their RV, and her daughter needs something to watch because her kids can't agree on what to watch, so she needs my DVD player. I coldly said that was not happening, and she actually gave me a loud, "Why not?" So I pointed out to her that this was really not my problem, and she just crossed her arms and said that, as an adult, I should be putting kids first. I said that would be the case if I had kids, but her kids are not my kids. I don't know them, and I'm in no way related to them, and therefore I have no obligation to them. So she rolled her eyes and then tried to offer me money for the headphones and DVD player. Admittedly, I didn't pay much for either of them, but I don't care. I wasn't interested in selling. She only offered $20 for both anyway. I just told her no and to kindly leave me alone to watch movies in peace. Then I tried to just sit back down and resume the episode. She didn't take that well and proceeded to try and grab my DVD player right in front of me. Like I was just going to let her walk off with it. I got up and stopped her while saying, "That ain't yours, lady?" She proceeded to try and shove me over. Try being the word. She clearly underestimated how heavy I am. I don't look it at all, but I'm around 230 pounds. My body frame just hides it well, and I've been in a few brawls in my life. I ended up grabbing her arms and shoving her back with little effort. She fell on her bum into some wet grass and started yelling that I'd assaulted her while looking around for support. I've seen enough Karen stories to know where this goes if I say nothing. So I yelled, "Yeah, assault. Assault on me when you tried to push me over and steal my stuff. And there are plenty of witnesses around us, lady. Or did you not notice?" There had already been a few people around us watching the whole altercation, and they'd gone dead quiet while staring. So then I said to everyone, "Check it out. We've got a bona fide Karen here who tried to take my stuff for her precious angel baby. Everybody clap for her." And they did. They actually started clapping. The Karen looked completely humiliated and stormed off screeching that I was an a-hole. Her yoga pants ass was all wet from the grass too, which only made it funnier. I kept thinking, "Your ass is grass," as she walked away. But I didn't say it aloud. I tried to resume watching the DVD as I was, but I felt uneasy the Karen might come back. She snuck up on me rather easily before, and I didn't want to risk that again. So I packed up and went back into my camper to continue watching and drinking inside. Got pretty plastered that night. I remember giggling like a moron while watching the episode with the panda people that were evil Chinese stereotypes. Stayed at the campsite for one more night and didn't see the Karen again until I was leaving Sunday afternoon. I saw her standing by her POS-looking RV with a large fountain beverage in one hand and a dog leash in the other. It was one of those yappy little fluffball dogs too. She glared at me as I drove past, and I just waved to her and said, "Bye, Karen," out my window. She threw her drink at my truck, but none of it got in through the window. I could hear her yelling at me, but couldn't really make out a word of it. I'm not sure what goes on in the heads of these people. I understand this could have gotten a lot worse, like that nut bar sicking the local ranger on me or something, but I think the public humiliation was enough to make her back off. I can only wonder if the rest of her family is just like her. Glad I didn't meet them. The next one is an entitled parent story. So, I am a 14-year-old male and my family recently moved into a house in a new estate. This estate has a massive park. My house is on the main road of the estate, and its garage is on the other side, along another road, and we are close to the park. About 2 months ago, they hosted an opening ceremony for the park. A lot of people came, including people from the surrounding areas. My brother, my parents, and I left our house and walked down to the park. Due to all the traffic, there were people managing it. Once we got there, we saw a car parked in our driveway. My dad is usually a calm dude, but he doesn't like stuff like this. My brother, 18 years old, and I went up to one of the workers and told him that the car in the driveway wasn't ours and we didn't want it there. The worker told us he saw the people parked there and kind of remembered what they looked like. We told him that it would be good if we could get the car moved. He said he would try to find her. About 20 minutes later, we saw him walking up to the car with a lady and her son, who looked to be about 9. She walked up there, and we saw her starting to get angry. Naturally, we walked up to see what was happening. This is the conversation that happened. Not 100% accurate. It's been a while. Karen: "I don't understand why you want me to move my car. I live here." Worker: "Well, they say that you don't, and I don't see why they would bring this issue here unless it was true." Karen: "They are clearly lying. I live here." My brother: "Ma'am, please. I live here and I even have keys to the house. Please move your car." Karen: "Bullcrap, complete bullcrap. I have lived here for a year and watched this park get built. Our house was finished 5 months prior to this." My brother: "Okay then, what 2 cars are inside the garage then?" Karen: "A Volkswagen and a Mazda." My brother: "Nope, a VW Jetta and a Hyundai i45. Karen: "That's not true. I'll open the garage and show you." As she scuffles through her handbag, my brother opens the garage. My brother: "There, that's the evidence." Closes the garage. Worker: "It's not your house, so please leave." She gets in the car and leaves while looking very angry. We didn't think to call the cops because nothing major happened, but it was funny to see her lying out of her ass and getting proven wrong.
The next one is an entitled People Story.
It was a story that took place a few years ago, a tale of triumph against an entitled neighbor who dared to trespass on my land. As a teenager, I witnessed my father and I confront this arrogant individual, standing up for our rights and the sanctity of our property. You see, my parents owned a vast piece of land, sprawling across 112 acres, some of it used for farming and the rest left unoccupied but well maintained. Unfortunately, trespassing and illegal dumping had become a recurring issue. Despite my father's efforts to fence and gate off the entire property, it seemed to do little to dissuade those who sought unauthorized access. ATV and quad bike tire marks became all too familiar, evidence of unwelcome visitors on our land. My father, a passionate gun enthusiast, had instilled in me a love for firearms. We spent countless hours honing our shooting skills, engaging in target practice and hunting excursions as the seasons dictated. Our camping trips on our land had become treasured memories, forging a strong bond between father, son, and our loyal chocolate Labrador Beau. As autumn descended, we embarked on yet another camping and hunting expedition. Driving deep into our property, approximately 1.5 miles away, we settled into a clearing my father had carefully prepared for our tent and fire. Excitement filled the air as we set up our guns and tree stands, eagerly anticipating the sight of majestic game. My chance finally came when a mature buck with magnificent antlers, at least 10 points, appeared before us. It was a moment that could mark my first hunting triumph, a trophy I would be immensely proud of. However, my first shot missed its mark, only grazing the deer's shoulder. The wounded animal fled, forcing us to track its blood trail for about 20 yards before we discovered it, still alive but suffering. My father swiftly ended its pain with a well-placed gunshot, though remorse tinged my heart. This incident reaffirmed my decision not to make hunting a regular practice. Not long after, the sound of an approaching engine shattered the tranquility. My father, now aware of the noise, joined me in listening attentively. 2 ATVs soon materialized, one carrying a kid younger than me, accompanied by a man who appeared to be his father. The man, sporting a beer gut and dressed in full camouflage, approached us with an aggressive demeanor, instantly startling our faithful companion, Beau, into a frenzy of barks. In an attempt to defuse the situation, my father approached the man, but Beau's barking persisted. Undeterred, the man berated our dog, venomously commanding him to shut the duck up. Sensing trouble, my father ushered Beau away and initiated a conversation with this unpleasant individual. To say that the man was hostile would be an understatement. He launched into a tirade, accusing my father of endangering his son with our gunfire. The absurdity of his claim left me initially bewildered. After all, we were on our own land. It slowly dawned on me that this man was not only a nuisance, but also an unapologetic jackass. When my father calmly explained that we were shooting into an area with a dense hillside as a backdrop, the man merely laughed, dismissing the safety concerns. Arrogantly, he declared that our shooting was illegal. At that moment, I mustered the courage to interject, informing him that it was deer season, and we possessed the necessary licenses. However, he swiftly silenced me, commanding me to shut my mouth and let the adults handle the conversation. With his patience wearing thin, my father asked, "Did you notice the no trespassing signs when you entered this land?" The man scoffed, claiming he had been using the land for months and had even created his own path of access. Astonished, my father clarified, "Are you aware that this is our land, not yours?" The man, oozing with smugness, insisted he knew the owner and had permission to use it. He threatened to call both the police and the owner to report our alleged illegal activities, child endangerment and trespassing. My father welcomed the call to the police, unfazed by the man's threats. He promptly dialed my mother, instructing her to bring the property deed and our surveyor's paperwork. Meanwhile, we loaded the deer into the back of our truck, only fueling the man's taunting remarks. "Can't wait for the cops to seize that illegally killed deer," he jeered, poisoning his young son's mind against us. A giant turd of a man indeed. I couldn't help but feel sympathy for the young boy caught in the midst of this unpleasant encounter. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the police arrived, their annoyance at the situation palpable. They wasted no time redirecting their irritation toward the rightful culprit. The officer approached us first, acknowledging my father's ownership by perusing the property paperwork, even complimenting me on my first deer. "A 10-point buck for a 15-year-old? "Impressive, kid," he exclaimed, patting me on the shoulder. He advised my father and me to remain calm and assured us that he would swiftly resolve the matter. The officer then turned his attention to the man, who eagerly regaled him with tales of knowing the landowner and possessing permission to use the property. When pressed to reveal the owner's name, he conveniently suffered from a sudden bout of amnesia. With a nod in our direction, the officer deftly pointed out, "Right, because they own the land." Panic washed over the ATV rider as the officer continued. "Did you notice the no trespassing signs when you entered?" It became increasingly clear that the man was cornered. To our satisfaction, the officer uncovered additional charges against him, stacking the deck against his reckless behavior. As the man stuttered and stumbled through his explanation, the officer inquired about vehicle registration. His response, neither ATV was registered, led to further penalties, compounding his legal woes. Defeated, the man left with his tail between his legs. He and his son trudged back to their vehicle, pushing their ATVs along while enduring the weight of trespassing fines and penalties for unregistered vehicles. As we drove past them, my father couldn't resist a parting shot. "Hey, I'd offer you a lift, but the deer in my truck bed takes up all the space." With a satisfied smile, we left the scene, our land once again secure. Our encounter with the entitled neighbor had transformed into a resounding victory for justice. This experience remains etched in my memory, a testament to my father's resilience and the importance of standing up for what is rightfully ours. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Set the scene. The place we were renting is a duplex that is split down the middle here in upstate NY. My little two-bedroom side of the house was next to the garages and driveway. It had a small side of the yard, which was 15 feet x 5 feet. We have a chocolate lab named Benny that uses that backyard for his bathroom, etc. The neighbor in my duplex, whom I'll call Rick, had the bigger side of the yard and a staircase that led up to the back field where there was a nice walking path and a horse farm. The back of our duplex was built into the side of the hill leading up to the horse farm corn farm. Rick was subletting one of his rooms to a Russian chain smoker whom we'll call Olga, and she was the same age as him, around 60. Rick is an a-hole 90% of the time and demands we never use his staircase to go up to the walking trail. His Russian friend and he also chain smoke in front of our living room window, making our house smell like an 80s-era bowling alley. Over the course of our renting this place, we got into numerous fights with these asshats over where they could smoke so that our side of the house didn't stink. The landlord lives in FL and uses the property as his retirement cash cow. We'll call the landlord Dwayne, and he's about 70 years old. The house itself was built in 1940 or earlier, and we lived on an old farm road with a pumpkin farm across the street. I just want you to have an image of the location because it'll come into play. The first week we're in the house unpacking, and my wife asks me to plug in the vacuum and run it around the downstairs to get up the styrofoam from the packing materials. I notice that the plug sparks when you plug or unplug anything. I call Dwayne and tell him, and he says, "Okay, call around and get a price from an electrician and let me know what it'll cost." This was a red flag for me. I'm paying $1,300 a month for this duplex, and now this guy wants me to do all his legwork since he is out of state. I figure whatever and find an electrician who'll charge $200 for the house call, plus the outlets he'll end up replacing. I call Dwayne and he says, "No, that's too much. I'll send one of my guys over to do it." This pisses me off because I just spent 20 minutes calling around getting ballpark quotes, but I figure it's fine as long as the work gets done. Fast forward 1 month, and his electrician finally shows up one day to do the work. He replaces 12 of the 14 outlets because he didn't think he'd find so many bad ones. I figure that's fine since the ones he didn't replace are in the room we never use. 2 months go by, and it's early spring, and it's raining a ton. One night we get a huge downpour that lasts for about 35 minutes. My wife says she hears water in the basement. I run down to the basement, and we have 2 waterfalls coming through the windows that look into the backyard, and there's 4 inches of water on the floor and rising. I call Dwayne the next morning and tell him about the windows in the basement and the flooding, and he says I need to find a cleaning service to clean up the mess. I tell him I can't because I'm going to work. He says, "Okay, do it after work then." I say, "Listen, I don't own this house, you do, so find someone today who can clean this up and repair the windows, or I'm going to do it myself and take it out of the rent, which is NY state law." He gets pissed and hangs up. Later in the evening he calls and says a cleaning service will be there in 2 days to clean the basement from all the mud and water. I tell him that's fine, but he might want to repair the windows since it's still raining pretty regularly. He says no,
That won't be necessary since he's still getting quotes about a French drain for the back of the house. The cleaning crew shows up, and they clean the whole basement out. It takes them 6 hours with power washers and scrubbing machines, etc. They leave at 5 p.m. that day, and we're thinking, okay, great, now we have the basement cleaned up. But the windows aren't holding anything out since they are so old and have no sealant around the outside edges. 2 days go by, and it downpours again, filling the basement back up with water and mud. I call Dwayne, and he sounds defeated. He tells me that he'll send the cleaning crew back out the same day the contractors are going to show up with the backhoe for digging the French drain around the backside of the house. Fast forward 2 weeks and everybody shows up. The work is completed and we're happy to have a normal basement again, even though I'm pissed that we had a swamp down there for so long. 2 more months go by, and one night my wife screams while in the kitchen. She swears she saw a mouse in the kitchen run from under the sink to under the oven. I ask her what it looked like, and she says big gray and had pink ears. I know right away this isn't a field mouse, but a full-grown rat. I open the drawer below the oven, and all our cupcake pans are full of little rat turds, and it's nasty. Thankfully, we never bake, so they weren't a big loss. I call Dwayne, and he says he has an exterminator friend who lives nearby, and he'll call him and get back to me. Dwayne calls back the next morning and says, I spoke to my friend, and he claims that your dog going to the bathroom in the backyard is probably attracting the rats. I tell him, rats don't eat crap, so that makes no sense. We'll need to have an exterminator sent out to deal with this. Dwayne goes on a tirade about how we're the worst renters, and that we constantly complain about little things. I tell him, for $1,300 a month, I expect a rat-free, spark-free living space that doesn't flood or smell like a bowling alley. At this point, Dwayne says he'll look into it and hangs up. I'm super pissed at this point. We've had nothing but problems with this place from the first week, and now we've got rats in our kitchen. I do a little digging online and find out that you can have the health department investigate rat infestations, and if they see that the landlord isn't doing anything about it, they'll put a lien on the house until the work is complete. So obviously, I decided to go that route. I call the health inspector, and he tells me that he'll come out in a few days to do an inspection and get back to me. Dwayne calls me back and says the rat problem is my fault because I have a dog and that I need to deal with the problem myself. I tell him, no problem, I just set up an appointment with the health inspector. Dwayne gets really upset and curses me out. I call my lawyer and tell him to call Dwayne and arrange for us to break the lease since I don't want to deal with him anymore. Fast forward 2 months. The health inspector found a bunch of rats and holes in the foundation and evidence that the colony had been living in the house for years and years from the looks of it. He contacts Dwayne and tells him about the lien if he doesn't address it. Dwayne calls me and says he's sending an exterminator. At this point, I had put the place up on Craigslist to find new renters since Dwayne had decided to sublet our lease instead of letting us out of it. I found some college kids who were desperate for a place, and they seemed like typical rich college kids. I tell them that the place doesn't have AC and they'll need window units, etc. But I also tell them that the next-door neighbor is pot-friendly and loves smoking. I tell them that he is super chill and that they can totally use the staircase in the backyard to access the hiking trails. One of the kids brought his mom, who showed up in a new Jag, so I knew that Dwayne wasn't going to be able to crap all over these people since I knew they'd lawyer up. I never mentioned the rat infestation, or that this place was a nightmare because I knew that these kids' rich parents would go nuclear with a lawyer if they had to deal with this stuff. Dwayne accepted the new tenants and let us out of the lease. All it took was a few threats from my lawyer before I got my security deposit back. Fast forward 3 months. I drive by the old place to see what's happening. It looks like the college kids and Rick are off to a rough start. There's a plastic divider down the driveway to separate who gets what. There are beer cans all over the front yard, and Rick's truck is parked on the side lawn. He never did that when we lived there, so I'm sure these kids were driving him crazy with parking. Olga is nowhere to be seen since she probably jumped ship when the parties started. I don't know what became of the rats, but 2 months later I did another drive-by, and there was no furniture on our side of the house, which tells me everybody had left, and Dwayne wasn't making any money, which made me happy since he was a ducking prick. The next one is a petty revenge story. This isn't necessarily my proudest moment, but I am tired of being the outcast. My 32F husband, Pete, 34M, comes from a family where the women are all bakers. I am a baker myself, and I used to sell baked goods out of my house under my state's cottage laws, but I stopped because I like it just being a hobby. His sister-in-law, Kay, 39, is the one who is known for her cupcakes and cake pops.
When I first met everyone years ago, it was the first thing I learned. Everyone talked about everything she made. Even when Pete mentioned how good my stuff was, everyone would say that Kay sells hers and they're popular, so they must be better. Whenever I bring treats, they are often left untouched because they are not Kay's. Yes, I've been told that. They ask me to bring something to every get-together and never touch it. To be clear, Kay is mainly a baker, whereas I bake and specialize in professionally decorated cakes. Kay says that overly decorated cakes are compensating for their bad taste, and Pete's family agrees. We had a BBQ on Monday for Memorial Day, and everyone made their treats. Kay decided to bring cake pops. She posted them on her Instagram the night before. So, and I know this is immature, I made the exact same ones she did, same flavor and design. We got there and everyone asked where my treats were. I said they're in the car and I'll get them in a minute. So I waited for everyone to be outside, then I brought mine in and put them next to Kay's. After we ate, I noticed the family eating my cake pops and not Kay's. She didn't notice at first and then asked if they weren't enjoying the cake pops. They said they just ate them and they were the best she ever made, and asked what she did differently. Even my mother-in-law said they looked so much better in person than in the picture. Kay was confused and said hers were still on the table. That's when I said, "Oh, I brought those, glad you enjoyed them." Her husband said he hadn't had one yet. Lies, he ate too. And everyone else just said, yeah, they were okay. Kay didn't say anything the rest of the night. Pete thought it was funny. He didn't know what I did until the reveal. But his brother, Kay's husband, said yesterday that what I did was mean, and I'm just mad that Kay is a better baker. But Pete said it's ridiculous that the family, including Kay, puts down my baking when they won't even try it because I'm not Kay. ETA. We aren't the only two who bring desserts, just the ones who tend to bake cakes more than others. Everyone else's desserts get eaten to some degree except mine. The next one is an entitled people story. I was in a serious drunk driving accident about 20 years ago. The car struck a sycamore tree at 50 miles per hour. Relax. The tree was fine. Me, not so much. I was in the front passenger seat and the engine came through the firewall and crushed my legs, and the hot metal gave me second-degree burns. I also had broken ribs, a cracked sternum, and a punctured lung from the seatbelt, bruised internal organs, a broken nose, and a bunch of broken teeth. I was a mess. My roommate, hereafter referred to as Cooter, was there because he had a cyst on his arm. He was a miserable wretch. Fresh air would have pissed him off. He idioted constantly about literally everything and maintained a baseline level of hostility toward everyone, even his girlfriend. She stopped visiting him after the first day I was awake, and for some reason he blamed the nurses for it. You would think he was being bitten by fire ants. Whenever he was asked to rate his pain from 1 to 10, his answer was always higher than 10. Cooter was a cook at a fire hall. I don't mean he cooked for firemen. At least in my area, a fire hall is a sort of blue-collar private club with cheap beer and greasy food. I knew what he did for a living because he periodically called the guy covering his shifts to micromanage him and argue about inconsequential bullcrap. Meanwhile, I'm lying there with 14 broken bones and teeth that hurt whenever they were exposed to air. I had a chest tube and couldn't go more than 5 or 10 minutes without coughing, which hurts like a mother ducker when you have broken ribs. When asked to rate my pain, I figured a 10 would be like if your organs were hanging out or you were missing large patches of skin, so I think the highest number I gave was 4. I was in a miserable shape, but I hated hearing Cooter verbally abuse the hospital staff. If it weren't for him, I might have snapped at someone occasionally. But instead, I made a point of always greeting them with as much cheerfulness as I could muster, and always saying please and thank you, and expressing appreciation loud enough for Cooter to hear. I was worried about taking too many opiates, so I would wait until the pain was getting close to unbearable before asking for more. At one point, I asked for pain meds, and there was a perfect storm of bad luck. My prescription had run out. They only write for 2 days of pain meds at a time when you're in the hospital. But it was shift change, and they couldn't find anyone who was on my treatment team to write a new one. It took almost 2 hours to get it sorted out. No one could have faulted me for being a bit cross. A few hours earlier, when they had brought us our lunch, Cooter had thrown an epic tantrum because he had asked for peas and was given corn. He started yelling obscenities at the staff and threw his tray across the room. It took a good 15 minutes to get him another tray, and he didn't stop yelling until it came. Even after it arrived, he wasn't mollified. He snapped at everyone who came in for at least the next hour about the bullcrap, half-assed operation they were running. So when I had to wait for relief from my pain, I took great satisfaction in remaining cheerful. The nurses kept apologizing every time they came in to check on me and give me a progress update. I kept assuring them that I knew they were doing their best and thanking them for their efforts. I repeatedly said, "Don't worry, it's not like you brought me corn or anything serious like that." When they did get someone to write a new prescription, they started me off with a shot, so relief was almost instantaneous. As it kicked in, I told the nurse who had administered it, "You are an angel of mercy, and I love you." I had a long, difficult recovery. When I left the hospital, I moved to a rented hospital bed in my brother's living room. I needed a wheelchair for 3 months and crutches for 7 or 8 months after that. I had 2 more surgeries over the next year and a half, and it was almost 3 years before I could return to work. In large part because of my experience sharing a room with Cooter, I never lost my sense of humor. The next one is an entitled parent story. I think every female family member who is the youngest of the adult generation, or at least a teen, can relate to this. Yesterday, we had a kind of big family function for the 80th birthday of my gran. My mother's younger sister was there with her kids, preschool, elementary school age. And like every single time, I, 20F, was expected to watch the little demons while her mother can have some adult time. Don't get me wrong, I like them, but in small doses, and I can't understand why it's me since her husband was there. Since the weather was nice, it was a BBQ in my gran's garden, or a backyard like Americans would say. It was good. I saw some cousins of my generation, some of them I haven't seen in years. So, since I had Saturday off, I work in healthcare, I shared a beer with my cousins and caught up. Well, then my aunt came in and asked why I dared to drink, since I have to watch over her kids today since she needs some adult time. I just asked her what about her husband, and she gave me the whole sob story of, he worked all week, LOL, I did that too, even made overtime in the nursing home I'm working in, and that's his day off, again mine too, and that he is on the grill. He's literally standing next to my uncle who is actually grilling and sips beer. So I looked her dead in the eye and chugged the entire beer that I just opened, 0.5 liter bottle. Looked her dead in the eye while my brother, the saint he is, took the empty bottle out of my hand and gave me a new one. I told her sorry, but I already drank. She left in a huff, and of course she told my mother and my gran, and of course, my mom was upset with me because she's my aunt and yada yada. The only ones on my side were my brother and my stepdad, who nearly pissed himself laughing when he heard what I did. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.